Okay, hello everyone. Simon Jacobson here. The Bible series, we call this, personal and transformative lessons from biblical characters, narratives, personalities. The greatest and the best-selling book throughout history, the Bible. So this week I want to speak about the Ten Commandments, but a particular detail that I believe has a tremendous lesson for each one of us today. The Ten Commandments titled, I will do and I will hear. The power of commitment. Action before understanding. Sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But bear with me. This program is dedicated in loving memory of Chanadu Zimmerman. Okay. You hear about commitment issues. People have the commitment issues. I really like her, I like him, or I really think it's a good opportunity, but I just can't really make the final decision. Something is blocking me. Something is stopping me from making a final decision. Commitment issues. Now, sometimes it's our own problem. It's a psychological block. The fear of failure, maybe the fear of success. I mean, we can analyze it and go through the usual suspects. But I want to present a counterintuitive approach, which goes back thousands of years. And it's definitely a good challenge to the options that we all have, to the commitment issue that so many of us deal with and suffer from. And that is, the narrative goes on the episode of Sinai, literally 3,333 years ago, a little more than that, meaning between 3,333 and we're going into 3,334. So we're talking about over 3 millennia ago. There was an event that perhaps is considered by many the greatest event in history, the giving of the Bible, or some call the Torah, however you name it. But there's one specific aspect of it that, there are many of them, but one specific bizarre exchange. Well, God is presenting his mandate, his blueprint for life. I like to call it life's operator's manual to the human race. And he offers it to different nations. And the nations, of course, the first thing you do is you want to see what it says in this contract. You don't sign a contract without knowing what it says. And they look at it and they say there's some prohibitions there we cannot deal with and we're not ready to accept it. One nation, another nation. Then he comes to the Jewish people, God does, and says to them, here, I'd like to present you my mandate, my blueprint, my operator's manual for life. And instead of looking into it, they say the words in Hebrew, Nasa v'nishma. We will do, we will commit, we will act, and then we will listen and understand what is said in this document. So of course everybody raises up their arms. What kind of behavior is that? It's irresponsible in a way, reckless. You sign a contract, you agree to the terms of a contract without first even reading it or understanding it. It's like the exact opposite of a commitment issue. It's too much commitment, or premature commitment if you wish. There's even an expression in the Talmud that one of the Roman philosophers says, what kind of nation is it that rushes to make such a commitment? A life commitment. It's not a small detail. You're committing your life to a cause, to a mission. So there you have the other extreme, the diametric opposite of a commitment issue, a commitment that seems to be irrational. And yet, when you think about it, it can teach us something about commitment and about life and about decisions that each one of us can learn from and literally can transform who you are and your future and your destiny. So here's the story. Everything has a bigger picture. It didn't begin at that moment that suddenly out of the blue a God appeared to the people and said, hey, I got a deal for you. Here's a contract. And are you ready to go for it or not? This is a people that had a relationship with the divine, with the transcendent, for a period of time. Firstly, remember they're just coming out of hundreds of years of a profound Holocaust in the Egyptian slave labor bondage and genocide. They suffered greatly. And they suffered because they were strangers in that land, as the Jewish people suffered so many times going forward. That's firstly. Secondly, before that, they came from great ancestors. We're talking about people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Men and women of profound faith and stature and spiritual evolved human beings who are in a very high state of consciousness, perhaps more than anybody in history, at least till that point. And these were their children. So they didn't meet God for the first time. They had profound and intimate experiences with the divine. They had promises that were kept. And now they finally were freed, as God promised Abraham, that your people, your children, would be in a land that is not their own, but then they will leave with great wealth. And here it was all being fulfilled. So they were dating, so to speak, God for a while. It wasn't like out of the blue, suddenly someone comes over to you. The question is, do you trust after you have been exposed, after you've met someone? And in this case, of course, is the divine. But you could always say it may be an illusion. It may be in their own minds. Maybe they're delusional. Maybe they're just wishful thinking. But after you've gone through both pain and joy in life with a God who you challenged and you argued with, and at the same time also embraced, and now, after these generations, we're talking about 7 generations from Abraham, is the generation of Moses, and when they finally arrived at Sinai. And now, this trusted date that you have been communicating with, that you've been interacting with, offers you a relationship. It says, I want to marry you. Will you marry me? So it's not a first date. So the wise and the healthy approach is, no, I'm not going to stay on the fence forever, and because I may have some doubts. They trusted this individual, in this case, the divine God. And when you trust, yes, I will commit, and then we'll get into the details. Because commitment is not to what's expected of you. It's not a grocery list of do's and don'ts. It's a relationship between two entities or two individuals that's built on fundamental trust. And when there's that trust, everything else follows. You can have a marriage, you can have a relationship where people do things for each other, a mutually beneficial relationship. But there's still a fundamental distrust, or at least not a complete trust of one to the other. So at some point, a relationship cannot just be built by the sum of the parts. There's always something deeper going on. A connection is made, a bond, a fusion. And yes, a certain vulnerability, what I like to call celebration of your vulnerability, is what true love is about. It's not in control. There's a deep trust, and you're ready to trust your life with another person. And that creates the bond, the necessary foundation for a true relationship. Now, of course, the question is, how do you get to a place of trust like that? We shall discuss that. But first, let's establish. So that's why they said, Nasa v'nishma. We will commit, we will do, we will act. And then we'll listen and understand. At times, that is the critical component in moving forward in life. Because it's easy to keep philosophizing. I keep finding all kinds of reasons. I'm not 100% certain. Maybe something else. Maybe there's someone else I would commit to. Maybe there's another cause. That's the mature approach, that after you've gotten to know something, in this case, the divine, and now you're offered, you don't need to keep nitpicking or even reading the details, because you trust the individual. You know what they ask of you will be something that you can and want to, out of love, commit to. And that is, my friends, the key ingredient that is unfortunately lacking, especially in our days. The commitment issue, and I'm not going now into the many reasons, including growing up in a home, a volatile home or unpredictable one, insecure. So obviously, when you didn't see commitment around you, you didn't see the commitment of parents to children or commitment of parents to each other, you don't you don't mature into the world and enter the world with trust, because trust was never really built. Obviously, that's a major factor. But I want to go a step deeper and also a solution to that. And that is the understanding that at the end of the day, it's not just a calculation based on details. It's a commitment to an ideal, to a cause. You love not just someone, you love something. You love what they stand for. It's not just the details. You like what they look like, their emotional connection with you, their intellectual, that's all important. But a fundamental thing that's necessary is that bond. Just as you trust yourself, and hopefully you do, you learn to trust another. And when that's there, that commitment is there, everything else follows. So of course the question is, what can we learn from these individuals or from this Jewish people, the nation, that we can apply to our lives today? What is it that they discovered in God that they could trust? Now, I need the big disclaimer. Many people actually have a very difficult and tenuous relationship with God. Many people feel God betrayed them. Many people feel God forsake them. In time of their need, in time of suffering, where was God? When I needed Him most. So obviously that needs to be addressed, because when you have that type of negative, not neutral attitude, clearly you're not going to just be open to building a relationship. But let's for a moment put that aside. I will get back to that as well. It all comes down to how you define God. What is God? So there's the classic story, one of my favorites, I tell it many times. Rabbi Yisro Berditchev, great 19th century Hasidic master, known for his unconditional love and non-judgmentalism, once said to a self-proclaimed atheist, listen to this, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. The God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. In other words, before we talk about yes God, no God, what does God mean? For many, we pick up the default nursery school imagery of a childish vision of a fairy tale God, of someone with a long white beard or whatever the look is, sitting on a throne in heaven, waiting to strike us with lightning when we misbehave. Punitive, angry, jealous, judgmental, condescending, everything that's associated, all the negatives with religion and faith. Just watch a Woody Allen movie, you'll get the picture immediately. Which is so much part of mainstream culture today. I know, I'm at the brunt of this. I travel, I speak, I meet people. The reaction of many, initially, oh, you're one of those. And then if they start liking you a bit, they'll say, okay, you're an exception. Now there's a reason behind this stereotype and myth. Because unfortunately many who so-called represented God in our lives, and this is true across the board, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or other schools of faith, or schools of other religions and schools of thought, or the authorities, so to speak, that misrepresented God. So that's your image of God. Who wants to have a God that's abusive, or that has representatives that are abusive, or hypocritical, or mediocre, or just irrelevant, plainly irrelevant? And I can go on and on about this. It deserves its own discussion. So of course, a God like that, there's no trust, and why would you commit to a God, especially not reading the contract? But let me give you an alternative God, an alternative experience, where you come to realize that the essence of all of reality is a higher transcendent state. Where the essence of all of reality, I'm not even going to use the word God. Let me share the story I often share about this. I remember years ago, when I began my class, my famous Wednesday night class. We're talking about now 40 years, 1982. So the core group were people from the arts and entertainment industry. By no means in any way traditional, but very spirituality that came from many different places. And we had this fascinating interactions that I learned from tremendously, and I hope they did as well. But I remember sitting there, though I was a man, I was wearing a younger man's clothes, and I was not quite white, black beard, probably still beginning to bald, with a yarmulke. And I remember just sitting there, and a person who I'm sensitive in communication, you know who you're speaking to, how they see you. I said to myself, I'm not projecting a neutral image. I may be evoking in someone the stereotype of an angry grandfather that schlepped him to synagogue in Yom Kippur against his will, or irrelevant Hebrew school teacher that taught hollow, empty bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah lessons, or maybe even a good memory of a grandfather or a grandmother at a Seder table, but definitely not neutral. So I said, so even before I open my mouth, I'm already at a disadvantage because I'm being stereotyped. And a big part of communication I could share with you is first establishing some trust, establishing a line. If there's a certain resistance due to whatever, a preconceived notion, it may even be not based on anything, you have a real problem. No matter what you say, it's going to be taken. You don't have the benefit of the doubt. So I tried an experiment. Instead of using any religious terms, instead of God, instead of Torah, instead of mitzvah, instead of Mashiach, redemption, Geula, I did not use any words. Instead of God, I used the word higher reality, or the essence of it all. Or if it was a particularly new age group, non-existential layers of undefined energy. And instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint, or roadmap. And instead of mitzvah, I used the word connection. And instead of Mashiach, Geula, redemption, Messiah, I used the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent and pontificating on connecting to the essence of all of reality, to a higher state of transcendence, by following a blueprint, making the connections, and ultimately creating fusion, seamless fusion, and the merging and integration of matter and spirit, form and function, body and soul, heaven and earth, transcendence and existence, in a glorious symphony of harmony within diversity. That was the gist of it. And it was going, what can I tell you? It was the experiment went better than I expected. A few weeks pass, a fellow comes over to me and says to me, before the class, he says, "Are you talking about God?" So I said, "Yes, but shh, don't spoil it for the others." Because the words themselves are loaded. So I bring us back the definition. If you feel the experience of God as let's call it the best you are, the best of you, or even beyond you, because not that God is nature and nature is God, that God is the essence of who you are and beyond, and leads you to states of transcendence and transcendence of transcendence, to be the healthiest possible you, the healthiest possible existence, with deep purpose and meaning. And you feel aligned, you feel at home with yourself, comfortable in your own skin. And your relationship with God is one that leads you to all those beautiful strengths and courage to overcome fear, to overcome inhibitions and insecurities, so you can spread your wings and soar. When you experience that for 7 generations, even less, then that God approaches you in whatever form or fashion and says, "Let's commit." What's the question? This is the greatest thing in my life. I couldn't wait for you to ask. That's called commitment. So how do we apply that to human beings? We need to look for a soulmate. We need to look for a friend. We need to look for people, a mentor, any connection that has that transcendent element. That it's not about that individual. It's not just a selfish individual saying, "Hey, let's join together because we both have mutual interest," which of course is conditional as long as one person serves the other. But you sense in a person that transcendent dimension. You sense in a person something that's beyond their own ego. They're dedicated to a cause greater than themselves. That's something you can trust. Because it's not about the person. It's about the person dedicated to something beyond themselves. That's where trust is built. Because human beings, even the best of us, we are mortals. We go through changes. We waver. But when you see a person committed to values, to love, to kindness, even at their own expense, meaning it's unconditional, that you can trust. And when you can trust that, you can commit. You know the details that will be asked of you will be commensurate to that personality. So at the end of the day, it's yes, correct what the 12-step program has come to discover by hitting rock bottom. We don't need to hit rock bottom. Is discovering that I surrender to a power greater than I am. So you'll say, well, that's good for people who are addicts, alcoholics. No, it's good for all of us. They just come to recognize it because they realized that I'm not in control. Many of us who think we're in control, can you trust a person who thinks they're in control? Even if they are, even if they're living a beautiful life, you want a connection to something greater than the individual. And when you have that, you have true commitment. And then you can say, yes, I will act, I will commit, I will do. And then I'll understand. Now, obviously, we need to go through the stages to come to that point. And we need a measure of understanding. And we need a discernment and discretion. You don't just jump in. But you're searching not just to understand everything, not just to find excuses and smoke screens to cover your tracks, to cover your own insecurity, being unable to commit. Your questions are coming from a healthy place because you want to discover something that you can surrender to, something that you can embrace unconditionally, something you can trust absolutely. And that's the foundation that creates true commitment. So I would submit, if you have challenges with commitment, it's not just forcing yourself to commit. Look for these ingredients that allow you to trust, that allow you to go back to that child, that innocent child that trusts naturally. And sometimes that trust was violated, was abused, was betrayed. But learn to find people that you could trust. And then that childhood innocence emerges. But use your discretion, use your mind to get to a place that's beyond the mind. Not irrational, but supra-rational. So your mind leads you to the door and says, now, to enter, you're going to need a commitment. But I brought you here. I've tested the waters. I've researched. I've done my due diligence. And then commitment becomes the critical component that creates an eternal connection to a cause, to an idea, to a belief, to God. But for this, we need to discover the true God, a true God that we can relate to. So here's one of the most profound lessons that I find in my life, and I hope you can find in yours, that can really help us get through that labyrinth, that quicksand that so much consumes us in our fears, our uncertainties, unknowns, and keeps us trapped. Like the guy that said, I used to think I'm indecisive, now I'm not so sure. Keeps you in that indecisive place. To find a place you can have a resolute decision because you're connected to something that is absolutely trustworthy. Thank you so much. This has been Simon Jacobson. We're here every Sunday live at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, but these programs are all recorded. So check us out at meaningfullife.com. We're on all the platforms, social media. Love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comments. And please share this with others if you see fit. Be blessed. Be certain. Connect to the certainty that allows you to forge ahead and ride forward, progress in a very resolute and confident way. Thank you so much. Be well.